This research started out in 1999, and I was shopping around the Earth and Biological Sciences department, just down in the basement here, in the other building too, for a research project. And I didn't like any of the projects the teachers were suggesting me. And one teacher told me, well, last year I visited Peru and we found an area with many fossil whales. And I said, that's it, going there. And the teacher didn't want to start it because he couldn't speak Spanish. So that's not a problem for me. So that's how, his name is Dr. Leonard Brand. I think most of you know him. So he got me initiated in this, and I'm happy. And I've been doing that with him and other people. You'll see the pictures for over 10 years now, 12 years. Okay, what's the problem? The main problem that any creationist model for the history of life faces is the interpretation of radiometric dates. And I didn't come here to bring the solution. Okay, that's a disclaimer. And I don't have the solution. I don't have it. But I think we can put on the table elements that may question their validity and their underlying assumptions. Not only are radiometric dates too long in the light of the biblical chronology, but also they seem consistent throughout the geological column. There's basically two problems in this: the radiometric dates and rates of deposition. Let me explain the second, because it's less known. Geologists and scientists measure the rate at which the sediments accumulate on the seafloor or on the bottom of lakes or on exposed land. In modern times, rates of deposition are very slow, although some geologists have estimated that they are both rates of erosion and sedimentation are too fast, and that the Earth would have been eroded many times over throughout the billions of years. And I think Dr. Rudd wrote a few papers about that. But still, rates of sedimentation are very slow in modern times to account for the formation of fossils. Geologists and paleontologists used a uniformitarian approach. Let's translate that. It means they apply principles and rates and processes in the present to the past. So if off California, sediment, off the coast of California, sediment accumulates at a rate about 15 centimeters thick. Sorry, I can't think in feet or inches, those weird measurements. I think in centimeters and meters throughout my presentation. Okay? So about this thickness accumulates off coast of California in present times over 1,000 years. Keep that in mind. So geologists and paleontologists apply that rate to the past. And they say, well, more or less between 2, 3, 5 centimeters and a few meters accumulated in the past. That's the uniformitarian approach to geology and sedimentary studies. So any fossil that is this thick would take hundreds or thousands of years to be covered. This is the underlying assumption that we take in this presentation, and is based on actualistic studies in modern times. These dates and rates obtained are then used to estimate the rates at which ancient sediments accumulated in the past. The question is, are those low rates of deposition, both in modern times and in past times, really as generalized as currently assumed by the standard geology? Or were those rates faster in the past? Let's go on a trip. And when I got to this area in southern Peru, you know, you arrive there and lots of questions come up. And you'll see a few of them. This is the desert of southern Peru. It's along the coast. It's the desert. It's called the coastal desert that runs from southern Chile or central Chile up all the way up to Ecuador. It's several thousand kilometers long and about 30 to 100 kilometers wide. And the Atacama Desert is right there. And this is the northern area of the Atacama Desert. It's completely dry, never, absolutely never rains. Never rain. If it would be a disaster. So you see here multiple layers. Keep that in mind. It's a very important piece of information. Multiple layers. According to radiometric dating, the Pisco Formation, geologists name stacks of sediments with names. We call it Pisco because there is a town there with that name, Pisco Formation, and they think that stack of sediment, about 600 meters thick, took about 12 million years to be deposited. How do we come up with that time? Because we dated a layer down here and another one up here, and there's this much thickness, and the layer down here is about 15 million years, and the layer up here is about 3 point some. So it's about 12 million years in between. We have done the dating ourselves. So we have those dates. And what we date is not bones. Bones cannot be dated. We dated volcanic ash. Only most datable material consists of volcanic material. Igneous, volcanic, or tuff, which is volcanic ash. There's plenty of volcanic ash in these sediments. And we dated that. That means that every meter of sediment took about 20,000 years for deposition. A meter is about this thickness, more or less about this height. That, according to radiometric dates, it took 20,000 years to deposit. Keep that figure in mind. It's very important toward the end of the presentation. Now, what we found there, we started looking for fossils. And this is a hill. Okay, let me show you again. You see that hill and this hill here? Okay, from where I'm taking the picture, that's this hill here. And the one you were seeing before, it was right here. So this is the valley. There's a river there. And this is the desert. And the ocean is all on the other side. From the valley to top of this hill, there's about 200 meters elevation. And as you can see, there's multiple layers. Some of them stick out, and they're very prominent. But most of them you don't see in this picture. But there's hundreds of layers here. Some of them are very relevant, and we name them with a letter and a number. 24, 22, 20, 17, and so on.
Question. What is cerro in Spanish?
Cerro? Oh, is hill.
So
like Cerro Loma Linda is Loma Linda Hill.
So is that the hill of whales at the bottom there?
Yes, exactly. There are so many whales that the locals call him Whale Hill. Or Loma. A loma is a hill in Spanish. Okay, so these are fossil whales that we found on this hill. And see the scale here. This is 1 kilometer and another kilometer here. So this is about 2 or 3 square kilometers. We found over 300 fossil whales just on surface without scratching any sediment. Just walking on surface. And there's many more over here and all around and everywhere. Okay, let's go. And they occur in multiple layers. Remember that. Multiple layers, because these hills consist of multiple layers. Okay, there, this is the diagram showing the thickness of the entire formation, basically. 600 meters. That hill that you were seeing is about this thickness. Actually, it's here. It's up here. It's on the top. There's more sediment underneath that hill, which would correspond to this thickness here. But that hill is over here. And you see it's plenty of fossil whales in multiple layers. Here's one of them. This is actually the very first one we excavated, the first year we worked there. And you see there, let me explain, this is the skull, the nasal bone, which is very prolonged in whales. These are the two lower mandibles or dentaries, the lower mandibles, and this is the neck, the vertebral column, the ribs, and two limbs, one here and the other one here. It's basically 95% complete. Only a few bones of the tail are missing. The bones are pristine, very well preserved, no evidence of scavenging, erosion, any kind of deterioration, nothing. Very well preserved. And in 2003, we submitted a paper to this journal, Geology, on rates of sedimentation. And you can access it online. Because we were questioning the rates of sedimentation based on the fossils that we found. And that's the topic of this presentation. And the editor liked the paper and the picture so much that they asked us for a picture for the cover. So skeletons show no evidence of long-time residence on the seafloor after death. That is relevant, and you'll see why later. That contrasts with what we find in modern whales now. Whales in present time die, they go to the seafloor, they sink, and they deteriorate very fast, and nothing remains after a few years. So the question is, why do we have fossils in the first place? So they are well articulated, the bones are perfectly preserved, most of them are fully articulated, and there's lack of marks by scavengers or erosion. So, questions arose in our minds. What do we do with this? We put ourselves to work. We had in our, the main question is, how do we explain radiometric dates here? Most, well, basically all previous researchers were just, assuming radiometric dates, assuming them as valid, and just studying the fossils to classify them. And nobody cared about the other questions like, why are there fossils here? And why are they so well preserved? So our approach was, well, let's study the fossils and see what they tell us about time, and about the sediments, and about their history. Our work is like of a detective. We find a cadaver, and we ask questions. Why, when, how, who, and what. And it's like the CSI detective, but ours is true. And theirs is not, because and you know very well, some of their analysis, they do it in 5 minutes, when we know it takes months. And I can't watch those movies anymore. It's just bothering me too much.
5 minutes.
Yeah, in an afternoon they solve everything, when we know it takes months. So let me show you a few people who work with us. We have faculty from Loma Linda. We have faculty from other Adventist universities, both from the United States and from overseas. We have non-Adventist scholars coming from various places. We have students from many countries. We are actually we are developing a mentoring program, and some of the students that are actually here in this room right now are the result of this mentoring program. That we pay their expenses to go and spend a few weeks working with us and helping us, and they realize that there's important questions for Adventists to answer, and they want to pursue a PhD in biology, geology, paleontology. And this last year these are students. Here we have a few students from Argentina, from Colombia, from Peru, and these are Dr. Leonard Brand and some from Dr. Biaggi from Argentina. This girl is from Spain. This is a wonderful girl from Brazil who wants to study archaeology. And I brought her to Peru to get, because paleontology and geology is somehow our sister fields. And here this was in January, just a few weeks ago. I'm working on an excavation here. You see, most of the time I spend taking notes and photographs, hundreds of pages, and also helping them out. Here is the crew this year, last January. You see, there's this is myself and another geologist from the Adventist University in Peru, and this is a colleague from Spain, and all the others are students who in a few years might be sitting next to you. Okay? We camped out sometimes because there's no Motel 6 around and no Starbucks and nothing like that. Let me show you some of our findings. This is a dolphin that we find so well preserved that even the outline of the skin is preserved. That's extremely rare. Even the outline of the skin. The ribs, okay, I guess many of you are related to the medical field, so somehow you know what I'm talking about. This is the mouth. You see the teeth in place. The finishing is not very good, but sorry. Okay, some of other specimens. This is David. And you see the skull here, the neck, the vertebral column, which is partially disarticulated, the ribs, limbs, the scapula here, the other scapula here, and we find a few shark teeth around. Even though it's partially disarticulated, the bones are perfectly preserved. Perfectly preserved. No marks of scavenging or deterioration or nothing. Just perfectly preserved. Another. Oh, this is Carmen. We only exposed it partially because there was a lot of sediment covering it. But see how well preserved it is. This was the only part exposed when we found it. It was sticking out of the slope, and that is badly deteriorated because weathering. But the rest of the skeleton is perfectly preserved. Even the neck is connected to the skull. We found a few shark teeth, but no shark tooth marks at all on the bones. So that's subject for further research. This is IC1. This is the one of the longest whales. To give you an idea, it's about the width of this room. It's very long for coming from the past. Blue whales are 3 times that size, but back in the Pliocene, these were the longest whales. And we only exposed them partially, just halfway through the sediment, because we don't have any place to take them to. It's not something that you put in your pocket. So you need trucks and anyway. This is perfectly preserved, completely articulated. Everything is preserved, even baleen. Baleen, which is the filtering organ And I'll come back to that in a few slides. The filtering organ is preserved here. You don't see it, but I see it because I have faith. Okay? It's preserved here. This is another specimen. This is Helen. Anyway, more. Another specimen, the skull, the two limbs, and the vertebral column. And this one is very remarkable. Okay, how many of you are in the medical fields? Okay, I'm gonna test you. This one has this is the skull, and this is one lower mandible, and the other one is next to it. This lower mandible was supposed to be here, but somehow was displaced, got displaced, and lies there. And the neck is here. This is the scapula, the other scapula, the vertebral column, and the ribs. The ribs over one side. And this is a perspective from here. You'll see the two dentaries here. Now, what do you see there? A fracture. Good. Well, it didn't take me long to realize it was a fracture. But I got the help of Dr. Ronnie Gasal, an orthopedic surgeon here working at the Arrowhead Orthopedics, and he gladly diagnosed it for me. And it is a fracture, and it's a healed fracture. It was fractured during lifetime, and it healed. And so this is very remarkable, and is the subject of one paper, actually. One paper that we're going to publish. So here is a team, various geologists and paleontologists from different countries, and this is the skull of a whale, a Balanoptera whale, like a humpback whale or a blue whale. And this is the vertebral column. It's kind of twisted. And this is how we find them sometimes. Sometimes they are partially exposed, and sometimes they're completely covered, and you see the outline of the sediment. There must be a skeleton down here. And but many times you find them like that. Something you would like to find in your backyard. And this is a modern blue whale skeleton. And this is Jonah. Okay? So, okay. What we found was a remarkable thing that we found was that many of these fossil whales have baleen preserved. Now, for you who are in the medical and biology fields, you'll find this very interesting. For two reasons. One, baleen, which is the filtering organ, you see there, they open the mouth, they swallow a lot of water, and they expel it out. Okay? They expel it out and retain small fish and krill and anything that was in the water. That organ consists of plates, or flat plates of keratin. Keratin is your fingernails and your hair. That's the composition. So it's labile, and it tends to deteriorate faster than bone. But there's another thing that that makes this finding very remarkable. Baleen is attached to the upper gum with an organic glue. It's not rooted into the maxilla like our teeth are. And forgive me for my wrong descriptions, okay? I'm not a dentist. So there's no roots going into the bone. There's just an organic component, an organic glue, keeping baleen attached to the gum. Once the animal dies, that organic glue decays, and baleen, that apparatus, that organ detaches and drifts away and decays. How do we know that? Observations from modern times. This is a great whale found a few years ago in Santa Barbara, on a beach near Santa Barbara in California. And you see baleen there. 2 days later, no baleen. And the whale also was flipped over. No baleen, only the tongue. No baleen, and the skin is gone as well, only a few pieces of skin. So, we found a lot of fossil whales with baleen preserved. And not only preserved, but in live position, in anatomical position. Here, these stripes are baleen. And this is the skull, and this is the zygomatic arc, then the neck.
Are they mineralized?
Mineralized. I'll show you details later. When I found these first specimens, I began to be curious about this. So I searched literature and museums. I visited tens of museums in many countries looking for fossilized baleen. And I found 7 specimens. 4 of them in California. A 5th I discovered myself in a museum in California. They didn't know they have it. And another one in Switzerland, which actually came from Peru. And another one in Oregon. That's it. 7 specimens with fossilized baleen. We have now a record of 60 specimens in Peru. We published a paper a few years ago just on this occurrence, fossilized baleen, reporting 37 or some. And since then, we found many more. And here you have another. This is the lower mandible and the nasal bone, and the maxillary bone would be here. Is mostly destroyed by erosion. And this is baleen in live position. How can that be if baleen detaches in a matter of a few hours or a few days after death? Okay, I'll leave that question for reflection. But remember this. It's very important. This thickness. About this thickness, 40 centimeters. Remember that. That is the thickness of that skeleton. It's very, very important. And think of the 20,000 years for 1 meter. Okay?
That's approximately 1/20th of a millimeter per year.
You do your own calculations. I guess you have cell phones with calculators.
Roughly 8,000 years.
8,000 years? Okay, 8,000 years. We'll come back to that later. Here are some details of baleen. Baleen is fossilized in between these stacks of sediment. It's fossilized there and shrank. Baleen is about 3 to 5 millimeters thick, but when it fossilizes, it becomes a fraction of a millimeter. This is modern baleen. This is modern baleen. Sediment here got in between it and fossilized it, petrified. This is another specimen. This is the skull and the scapula here, and baleen in situ. There is a detail. Okay. Paleontologists believe that the present is the key to understand the past. Therefore, we should study what happens to whales in the present to ascertain what happened in the past. I'm just following the same methodology as any other geologist. And in the field, we work as any other scientist. Actually, we bring non-believers and atheists and non-Adventists to work with us. We need their insights. And they actually, we help them see things that they don't see, and they help us see things that we don't see. That's very good for everybody. But we use the same methodologies. And I'm going to use the same assumptions now. Let's assume that the past was similar to the present. So I decided to study dead whales in the present, something that most people would not do, but it's actually fascinating. So I contacted a research institution asking for help on this. And I found that there's many, in some places, whales tend to go to get stranded. So I kind of study what happened to stranded whales. They disarticulate. Okay, their soft tissue removed, and then they disarticulate very fast. And after a few years, no bones are preserved. Some other whales sink to the bottom of the sea. And they are colonized by these creatures that eat the flesh and then start eating the bone. Because whale bones are very rich in fat. Very rich in fat. Some of these, in the Smithsonian Institution, they house hundreds of modern whales, and the main problem they have is that the floor is stained with fat. After 100 years, they still have fat. Now, if those bones you leave on the seafloor, they last a few months, because so much fat is a feast for animals down there. So I got on board of this research vessel, embarking Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute, and we went off the coast, and we searched for dead whales on the seafloor, and we found this one here. We found many, but we studied that one. February 2002, 3,000 meters depth, 32 miles. Sorry for the miles. Should be kilometers. And this is the remote vehicle we sent down to the seafloor with cameras and lights and everything. And this is the control room on the vessel. And this is the whale we found, the skeleton. It's a skeleton of a gray whale, 6 February 2002. And remember that date and see that the skeleton is very much deteriorated. And the skull is almost gone. See here on this side, mandibles are gone. And look at the creatures living in the sediment. Oh, something happened to this. Okay, let's go back again. Okay, now, this is the skull, the neck, and the vertebral column. And part of the bones are partially destroyed. We estimated that this skeleton had been on the seafloor for about 6 months. Well, I don't know what the problem is, but yeah. Okay, there we go. This is in March. A month later, a view from the other side. This is about 1 year after it's dead. And you see most of the skull is deteriorated, is destroyed. August 2003, there's bacterial colonies and all kinds of creatures living on the bones and eating up the bones. You see these bones? This is a rib. It's 50% destroyed already. And the vertebrae are mostly destroyed. A vertebra is about this size, okay? And is reduced to 25% of its volume. And this is a phalange full of borings. So I don't know how to do this, but So you see that the level of deterioration is very intense. Sometimes I have to do that, otherwise it wouldn't work. Okay, see this vertebra is being actively eaten up by those crabs. So I found out, I realized that we have the opposite scenario to the fossils. And I thought of, well, this is an example of how not to become a fossil. And actually, I presented a paper in an international congress with that title. It was a poster. If you come to the Geoscience Research Institute, you'll see that poster. How not to become a fossil. After about 3 years, the skeleton is gone. You see details. This is a rib, and it's mostly destroyed. So, the paradox. And now comes the reflection. At current rates of deposition, a 40-centimeter thick whale skeleton would take 500 to 4,000 years to bury, or 8,000. Okay? Well, why that disparity of figures? Because it depends on the rate of deposition. In some places, deposition is relatively fast, and in other places, it's relatively slow. So let's say 500 to 8,000 meters. Years. Oh, years, sorry. A 40-centimeter thick. Modern observations indicate that long before the skeleton would have been disarticulated and the bones dispersed and destroyed. Bones are destroyed within a few months or a few years to a few years. A 40-centimeter whale skeleton would not wait there 500 years, perfectly preserved to be buried.
Do you have borings in those things?
In
the fossils?
fossilized? No, no borings. Absolutely nothing.
The usual counter I get to this is that they died in anoxic conditions, so there was no animals to eat them up.
Okay, good question. But the counter, the answer is that these deposits are shallow water. We estimate, based on other evidence, sedimentological and other fossils, that is a water depth of between 30 to 50, 60 centimeters, meters. Very shallow as to have anoxic waters for 12 million years. Okay? I don't know of any modern setting that would fit into that. But that's a good question, because geologists almost always, when they want to explain excellent preservation, they come up with that idea, anoxic waters. How can you have anoxic waters for 12 million years in a water depth of 30 meters? You can't. When there is evidence for currents also.
Where do anoxic waters actually occur?
Very deep, very, very, very deep.
Black Sea.
Yeah.
But I mean, aren't they pointing out to life forms even at greatest depths?
Yeah, that's a good point. Those modern skeletons that I show you come from 3,000 meters off California coast on the Monterey Bay Basin and off Los Angeles. Waters are anoxic there. They measured the oxygen level. We have the values. They are basically anoxic. Do you see how many fish and crabs and anemones were living there?
Even in the Black Sea, where there's very anoxic, acidic waters, there's still a degradation by creatures that live in those conditions.
Yeah.
So, and we have anoxic bacteria that do just fine. Anyway.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, these modern whale skeletons are called oases. Biologists call them ocean oases because nothing lives outside, because it's mostly anoxic. A few creatures live outside, but around a few meters and on the skeleton is plenty of life there. And biologists struggle to explain how these creatures got there. But in fact, they do.
So this is not close to any of these vents or...
No.
So I'm still, I guess I'm a little surprised that So this whole idea of catastrophism is not a generally accepted idea? Punctuated equilibrium or catastrophism?
No. Well, there are two concepts there. Punctuated equilibrium is one concept, and catastrophism is well assumed and well received within geology. But they say, yeah, the Earth is very old and many catastrophes happened. But they don't accept just one global catastrophe.
It seems to me that while catastrophism is well accepted, that what are you going to do when you have so many
Layers
throughout the whole thing preserved?
And
this kind of destroys that argument.
I'm coming to that point. And also, baleen will have been completely dispersed or destroyed in a matter of a few days. Conclusions. When we apply modern rates of sedimentation to these deposits, we come up with ages of millions of years. We've dated the sediments, and we've come up with millions of years between those two layers. Now, I said, well, we have a problem. Let's study the fossils and see what they tell us. Okay? Radiometric dating suggests a long time. However, the study of these fossils and the sedimentary layers as well suggest a much shorter time framework. The occurrence of well-preserved skeletons and baleen strongly suggest rapid burial in a matter of days to weeks for any given whale. Now, remember that we have multiple layers, and we have adults and juveniles. That means that a catastrophe happened, killed the whales, and we have to come up with an explanation for the death of the whales, and an explanation, a model or a scenario for the burial of the whales. So they died and they were buried, but another community lived and repopulated the area. And they died and they were buried and so on. So it's hard to explain within a one-year flood model, because you have hundreds of layers that will require at least a few decades or a few hundred years. Now, I don't have the answer for that. Maybe it was the flood, maybe it was before the flood, or maybe it was after the flood. You know, I don't have the answer for that. It's not something that worries me. I'm not particularly worried about fitting this into the global Noah's flood. But my interest is first explain why are they there, why they are there, and how that happened. The when will come in a later time if God, wants me to understand it. Let me finish anyway. The same rocks and fossils can be studied from different viewpoints using same methodology. This last January, I had in my team several students and teachers, some believers and others were not believers. And we openly discussed up there, standing before the fossils, these issues. And my colleague was saying, well, look, you have here so many layers, so many fossils. This requires time. I said, yeah, I understand that. I even accept that. But look at these features. How do you explain this fossil, this feature, if that took thousands or millions of years? Well, I don't know, he said. I don't know. Well, neither do I. I can't answer your questions, and you can't answer my questions. And we worked for 2 weeks using same methodology, same thing. We do the same thing. And the same questions come to our minds. And we try to answer following one model, and the other one tries to answer following the other model. That's okay. Eventually, at the end, hopefully we'll be able to explain things. Meanwhile, I stick with my faith. The fact that I can't explain things within a biblical framework 100%, maybe I'm able to explain it 20%, 40%, or 5%. The fact that I can't explain everything within a biblical time framework doesn't stop me from believing the Bible. It just encourages me more to believe it and to do more research.
Yes.
We use the same data available, and we come up sometimes with different explanations. An increasing number of studies suggest that some thick sediments were not deposited over a span of time of millions of years, as radiometric dates and modern rates of deposition seemingly indicate. They must have been deposited in a very short span of time. I don't know how much short. That I don't know. But I see that the study of these fossils challenge and question radiometric dates. Something has to be wrong with radiometric dates, because the study of fossils, and not only these fossils, many other fossil occurrences, question the underlying the radiometric dates. Some things occurred differently in the past. The difference. Some people are willing to accept new, outrageous explanations that don't fit in the predominant evolutionary long-age paradigm. Some people don't, are not willing to accept that. However, they may be using the same data and method. The significance. Studies in geosciences are shedding light on Earth processes that question evolution and fit well in young Earth models and or catastrophism. Scientists don't need to invoke evolution and long ages to explain the fossil record. And I encourage the students that come with us, yay, you work just as any other scientist, but keep in mind that there might be other ways of interpreting things that some people are not willing to consider. And I dare you to consider those possibilities. Thank you.
Occasionally, when I've presented this argument, some people say, okay, yeah, the whales were buried rapidly within that layer, but then the vast amount of time occurred between the layers.
Okay. Well, if we had time between one layer and the other one, we would be able to see certain things in the sediment. Now, for example, we would be able to see erosion levels. The seafloor is not absolutely flat as this table. It has marks of erosion and marks of creatures walking on it, and burrows. The seafloor is burrowed by worms, crabs, and mollusks. We don't see any of that there, except in some conspicuous layers. A few of them have burrows. Yeah.
So what do you? My big question then is,
one every 100 layers.
What do your friends say about the lack of bioturbation and the lack of evidence for time between layers? Obviously, they can't. They have to admit that those layers were formed rapidly, and then the whales were in each one of those layers pretty much. So how do your friends who are atheists or evolutionists explain that to you, or what do
they don't have an explanation. They suggest the environment wasn't suitable for creatures to live in the sediment.
So anoxic thing.
And I said, well, explain that to me. Why wasn't suitable? Well, we don't know, but some reason. But that applies to both models. Okay. It wasn't suitable. It applies to both models.
These are also tertiary layers, right? These are Cretaceous.
Yeah, no, tertiary.
Miocene,
Pliocene.
All right, okay. They're tertiary. So that could possibly be after the flood as well.
It could.
Okay, I have two questions. I'll ask the first one, which I have a shorter answer probably. Are the whales oriented more or less the same way, right side up, or are they upside down, turn this way, turn that way? Is there any similarity in the orientation?
Okay, that's a good question. I measured each whale. We measure with a compass, and also dorsal side up and ventral side up, and they are randomly oriented, which you would not expect on stranded whales. Stranded whales usually are parallel to the shoreline, about 80% of them. But here they are randomly, and we measure that with compass. And second, there is about 60 or 65% whales are ventral side up, and about 40 to 45% dorsal side up. which is reasonable because when they die, some of them float for weeks, and as they float, gases accumulate in their belly and they flip over, and then they sink that way. Now, we find unbelievable. I don't have time, but we find unbelievable things that, like the skull dorsal side up, but the rest of the skeleton ventral side up. And we found vertebral columns with a Z shape. And, well, unbelievable. And here we have the whole record from the Eocene, 50 million years ago within the evolutionary framework, up to 1.5 million years ago within that framework. We would expect to see transitional forms. Nothing. Radiometric dates are useful, though, in practical uses in the field. We use them to trace layers and to kind of place us within the sequence, up or down. They are useful. I'm not rejecting that. I use them, to place myself in the field and in the sequence. The thing is, I think we've used potassium, argon, and rubidium strontium. And, but the thing is that regardless whether they can be used in the field and they have some meaning within the sequence, fossils tell us that something is wrong with that.
Yes.
Fossils cannot stay on land or on the seafloor for hundreds of years, as radiometric dates suggest. So either we don't understand the fossilization process, or we don't understand radiometric dating and dates the right way. So I encourage you to be open and at the same time be honest. There are things that so far we don't have an explanation for within a biblical framework. That doesn't deter me from believing the Bible, from believing that what God said is what happened, or what happened it was God said in His Word. And second, I must be honest to realize and admit that I'm limited. I can't explain everything, and maybe I will never. And meanwhile, I'll keep on doing research and scratching my head. Let me show you, because
Quick question.
You raised that question. This is a thin section of the sediment associated with the whales. A thin section is a sediment that we glue on a glass, and we slice it. It's so thin that we can see through it under the microscope. This is diatom. Diatoms are marine algae, the ones that color your swimming pool, green color. And this is most of it is diatoms. Diatoms makes the bulk of sediment in these areas. It's the finest sediment that you can find. And it's algae, is the skeletons, outer skeletons. But you see these crystals here? This is crystals of volcanic ash. Look at this crystal and any other. Look at this crystal, for example. The edges are sharp. You see these edges? They are sharp. I took these samples to an expert in Texas a few years ago, and I showed him this material. And he said, he's an expert in diatoms. He said, well, here you have rapid deposition of diatoms. Extremely rapid, something that we don't know of in modern times. Rates of deposition of diatoms nowadays is between 5 to 150 centimeters per 1,000 years in marine basins. Well, he said, no, you have a different thing, because otherwise no whale would be preserved. And second, because within this diatomaceous sediment, we have these volcanic crystals that are sharp, Now, if volcanic crystals came from the air, right, and descended through the water column, they're made of silica, and they dissolve really fast. And before the solution, their edges become smooth. What we found was that the edges are sharp. Means sinking was fast and time residence on the seafloor was short because there's no dissolution and the edges are sharp. And actually that was the subject of the paper we published on the journal with the whale on the cover. We published a paper saying, hey, we are questioning some assumptions based on what we find in the sediments and in the fossils. Nobody replied to the journal saying, these guys are wrong. Or they did, nobody did. Also, we think that while these shards of volcanic glass were, in the atmosphere and sinking in the water, you remember that whales have to come up out of the surface to breathe. Perhaps they breathed volcanic ash and that destroyed their lungs and killed them. That might be a possibility. But you see, we have evidence that question long periods of time for fossilization and burial, both from fossils and from the sediment. Now, there are other things that do suggest a long time, like burrows. So we still need to, geology is this two-plate thing. You have things that suggest short time, you have things that suggest long time. Well, you work with both plates trying to to understand and explain it.
Mary Schweitzer found soft tissues in dinosaur bones, and it's turning out to be fairly common, a common finding of viable soft tissue, not fossilized, not mineralized. Have you sectioned any of the larger whale bones?
Well, actually, Dr. Boscovich, who was sitting next to you, is working on that. I supply with bones, and he had a student working on finding. I think I'm not sure to this date. I think they found protein in fossilized bone.